Hello, everybody, and there's our cool new intro. Welcome to another edition of The Extra Shift. I'm Chris here, as always, with Brendon. How are we doing?
Good. You know, stepping up the production quality. It's
We are.
nice to see. We thought after 194 episodes, maybe we should have an intro. And
move. Maybe a stationary logo with us talking over the top of it's not a great intro.
Maybe. That's all right. I mean, look, it is what it is. We've been having fun with it, and it's not about the intro. And probably those of you listening on the podcast, like, what the fuck are you talking about anyway? But it is episode 194. There's not a heap of 94s in the NHL, but there is this coming season Corey Perry in his Blackhawks era, which is exciting. That's going to be great. $3 million fourth liner Corey Perry on the Blackhawks.
Fourth liner, excuse me. They're gonna put him on the first line, and he's going to be playing as Connor Bedard's shield. Because that's going to stop people taking a run at Connor Bedard. No, it won't, by the way. That's sarcasm dripping from that statement.
Honestly, have you looked at like the top to bottom lineup of the 23-24 Blackhawks?
There was a who was it yesterday who tweeted out? Can't remember. It might have been Jay Fresh who tweeted out. Or it was either Jay Fresh or Pete Blackburn, where they were like, Connor Bedard might drag them away from last. But yeesh, that team.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. Like, if Connor Bedard wasn't on this team, like it's like the last in the NHL with a huge bullet.
What they tried to do in tanking, they're just doing.
There's a guy on their top defensive pair on Daily Faceoff, which I know is just not.
I've deliberately not got that open, so you could give me any name, and my answer would be that's him.
Philip Ruse. Apparently, this is a real person that exists in the NHL. I've never heard of.
We're into the regens already.
Yeah, I mean,
I wasn't aware we were that far. I wasn't aware we were that far into GM mode.
Yeah. Philip Ruse, Jared Tenorti, and Wyatt Kaiser is the left side of their D, according to this.
Whoa!
The right side, you pick are people you've heard of, but like, come on.
I mean, Jared Tenorti I've heard of, but
yeah.
Like, but the other two,
I've heard the name Wyatt Kaiser before. I've never seen.
He's a creative player again. Another creative player. That regen pack's not working properly. It's like when you start getting in the regen pack, and you just start getting all of like the really big classic names, but like with a weird first name on the end of it.
Yeah.
So, and then the other day, I got so bored in a GM mode on Be a GM on NHL that I just signed players with names over 5 syllables. I actually had a forward playing a left winger. Called what was his name? Was Giannis Strombolombolopoulos, and I'm not kidding. Strombolombolopoulos was his name, and that's the entire reason I signed him. Like, I didn't care what his stats were. I think he was a really low level player. I just wanted the name. That's all I wanted. In terms of the others, though, you got San Jose Sharks legend Alexander Barabanov.
Yeah.
Obviously, look. I joke around about that, but he's been a really solid pickup for the Sharks. Actually.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, that's fair. That's
I've been really happy with that.
Honestly, done some decent kind of like bargain hunting.
We're doing the bargain bin shopping, and we're doing it very well. Again, we're finally signing one of my favorite players from the draft in Philip Zadina, just several years and like a bunch of bust potential late. So anyway, so we are, again, as we said, we are at 194. There's a potential there for someone to come and snare, that. It doesn't really matter that Ryan Smith had it forever in Edmonton. I can hear people yelling that. Or Brendan Shanahan had it, but he only had it in Hartford. That doesn't count. If Brendan Shanahan had it in Hartford, it doesn't count. So there is the chance for people to come and claim 94. Actually, I will say I can hear some Rangers fans, probably with Derek Bugard, but that's a whole other thing. We might actually talk a bit more about that in the off-season stuff. I mean, we're almost getting back into season, so
probably not a lot of potential to do that. We're at least coming up close to preseason. I'm looking forward to. I think it's like something like about 6 weeks' time or whatever is. The LA Kings and the Arizona Coyotes will be in Melbourne. They've started selling tickets to watch them practice.
The stuff's in the crates. It's on the way.
I don't know if I can justify paying $25 to go down there and watch practice, to be honest.
I don't know if I can justify it either, but especially not for me because we're going to pay for a flight. But
yeah, well, I mean that too. I mean, it's more a matter of like I would have to take the day off work. I would have to go down and park again, and that's probably going to be like $20-$30 parking.
It's a lot of effort.
Yeah, just
You could have just been going to college in Arizona and say the same thing. So
that's pretty much it. Apparently, the Stanley Cup is going to be there, which is cool. But I don't know. We'll see.
I'm not
I've
so much
definitely got
interested.
tickets for the Sunday game though, so I'm going to that.
I'm not so much interested in the Stanley Cup bit as I want to meet Phil Pritchard. He looks like a bang up dude. He looks like a bang up dude. Like one of the greatest haircuts hockey's ever seen. Is Phil Pritchard. So to begin, we have a trade to announce. I think you're going to want to hear it. Jeff Petry's been moved by the Habs to Detroit. 50% retained. That was a long.
Well, I mean, it was always going to be the way. Like the reason that he got traded to Pittsburgh from the Habs in the first place, like a year ago, was that he didn't want to be there anymore. He requested a trade. So I was a little bit surprised when he went back.
He came back.
And I always figured that there was going to be a flip in the works. Unless he just changed his mind and decided, no, it was actually pretty good here. So it was just going to be a matter of who was going to be interested in taking him. But Gustav Lindstrom and a 2025 fourth is the return from Detroit. Lindstrom is a prospect of some caliber, nothing particularly. We're not talking about Nicholas Lindstrom here. This is the other Detroit Lindstrom, but.
The other white Lindstrom.
I just searched for Lindstrom NHL to try and bring up his stats, and it's just pages of Gustav Nicholas. I'm like, no, that's not what I meant.
I like the idea that you look up Nicholas and there's just pages of Gustav.
Yeah, that would be more impressive. I mean, look, if he can do that, if he can achieve that in his career, that's incredible. But right now, he's a 24-year-old journeyman who's played a handful of games in the NHL, 128 games, actually more than I expected. But only
more than
25
he expected
points
from the sounds of it.
Well, only 25 points in those 128 games. So look, probably a career fourth liner.
Yep. It also sounds like, Casey DeSmith, and it's really interesting because I really enjoyed a lot of the analysis post the Carlson three-way trade was, in the Habs, they've gone out and, Petry's going to be that sort of locker room presence. And, Casey DeSmith gives them maybe a temporary solution in net. Sounds like they're trying to move Casey DeSmith on as well. So all of that analysis that everyone did immediately post-trade is out the window.
I think that all of these guys got some kind of discussion from the Habs straight away, being like,
promise, hey, look, we won't keep you.
Yeah, we know, we don't have a plan to keep you long term or whatever. We intend to move you on. We'll find the right fit for you or whatever. It doesn't sound like it's happened for DeSmith at this point.
And they probably said, look, we will try to find a better fit for you. You need to be part of this deal as a make weight to get this other deal over the line. We promise we'll try to find you somewhere where you want to be because we're still getting assets back for this. So
I think honestly it's probably a difficult sell. Like DeSmith hasn't really ever been anything spectacular in the NHL. He's got 1 year left at 1.8.
I was intrigued that
not super cheap for a backup.
I was intrigued that San Jose weren't talking about the idea of bringing him into San Jose, actually. Not that I'd want him, but, they are so desperate for long-term solutions in net that I kind of felt like they might have taken the flyer there and gone, well, why not? I think San Jose is probably going to roll with Kakkonen going forward, and that's what they're looking at the minute until they've got some really good goalies still coming through in development. And I think that's what they want. But in the meantime, I think there's going to be this ever-rotating cast of who's in net for them at the moment. And they probably didn't want to put the money on Casey DeSmith. So, which doesn't really matter for San Jose because we're not spending it on anybody.
No. I mean, I imagine for Montreal, they'll eventually just get like a late pick or something and move him onto a team who's willing to play him. But
probably. Meanwhile, we have to talk about it. So obviously there are contract extensions, and we need to talk about the contract extension for the first overall pick, Alexis Lafreniere. 2 years at $2.325 million. This feels very much like the New York Rangers going, you haven't done anything yet, and we'd really like you to do something, which is fair.
Yeah.
But I would also point out how many of the Rangers' high picks have done anything. And as we've said before, is that possibly a bit of a symptom of the Rangers?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a question certainly at this point in time. Like, probably you look top to bottom down their roster, and all of the guys that they've drafted, like
they've drafted well.
I mean, you would think so. Like
in every draft, if you look at
in every draft, high.
In every draft where the Rangers have like drafted high, if you look at what the Rangers have drafted, you look at it at the time and you go, that's the right pick. That's the right pick. That's the right. Like Capo Caco dropped to them. That was the right pick.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm not saying that I would have made a different.
No, but this is the thing. But this is what I'm saying. Lafreniere at number 1 was the right pick. You know, Caco dropped to them.
I mean, maybe not in hindsight when you look at like how some of the other players
at the time,
when you look at like everything that everyone
there wasn't a debate,
at least.
Well, there wasn't a debate over Lafreniere. It was Lafreniere. So what that says to me is that it feels, and we've said this a few times, it feels to me like the Rangers system is just broken. And there's not been a focus on development. And I think that for me has come across in the way that Dolan's run that team, because they were working on that development curve and it was all starting to go really nicely. And then Dolan lost his mind and decided he wanted grit. And, made a bunch of changes and brought Drury in as the general manager and went out and Gerard Gallant happened. And
I mean, you add to that the trouble they've had with like Kravtsov and so forth, and him going back and all that kind of thing. Like certainly they haven't had a lot of success with the young guys, despite announcing that the rebuild was done and after a really short time, and we've got these pieces that are going to turn into everything, and they're just kind of all ended up being. They really have been a team that has been completely. All of the cracks have been covered over by 2 players. Literally, all of the cracks in the Rangers lineup have been covered over by Adam Fox and Ilya Shesterkin. Yeah,
right. They've covered everything. Igor Shesterkin and Adam Fox have covered every single problem. So I'm interested to see what the contract looks like in 2 years' time. I've from what I've seen, like the kid line in particular, when they've played, have been good. It's just they weren't.
Yeah, I mean, they've been fine.
Yeah, they weren't running them out in like any real. When they got into pressure situations, they were running other lines, and that was part of the other thing too. Is that I think the Lafreniere thing's interesting because he gets a lot of crap for like, well, where's this big explosion and boom? But as I've pointed out a number of times, Panarin's been in that position a lot for the Rangers, and hasn't done much with it. So, like, it's not just Lafreniere not performing. There's just a lot of underperformance coming offensively, which gets covered over by Shesterkin making 15 million saves a night and Adam Fox being elite.
Just quietly, too. I mean, Shesterkin's still on a $5.6 million deal until basically his deal expires at the same time as this Lafreniere deal expires.
Yep. That's going to be interesting.
So that's going to be really interesting, when he's 29 and wanting an extension.
Will he be? I would assume he'll be the next one to start a goalie contract with a 10.
I would think at least, like, that was,
he would be the highest paid goalie in the league. I don't think there's a doubt about it.
Should, like, realistically, given, his consistency.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. Like the others who got those contracts, like Carey Price, yeah, okay, that's fine. But Bobrovsky hadn't been consistent. Like, to get that contract, he wasn't consistent. I think if Igor continues at the rate he's been going, that consistency means he will be one of the rare goalies who you'd go is worth a $10 million plus contract. So Brandon Hagel also re-signs with Tampa at 8 years at 6.5.
He's still got one more year this current year at 1.5, which honestly is a bargain considering the reality that he is pretty much legit top 6 player. Yeah. It's just that there's no more discount after that, which is interesting because it's a real like anti-Tampa of the past thing to do. But I mean, this is I guess how they've been going in the last few years is they've been locking up all of those guys that used to be bargains for them, and the reason that they were such competitors to market value. And now they just don't have any space for bargains anymore. Like this is not the Tampa of old where you were running out, top 6 guys on entry-level contracts and $1-2 million deals or whatever in your top 6 and had insane depth. Like they have a lot more holes in the roster now. This
is where it's been really intriguing though for me is that, and there's obviously everyone knows that there's a contract we're about to talk about, but the teams that have for years had this reputation of all their players sign cheap bargain deals, and they give them this window like the Tampas and the Bostons. Those windows are closing rapidly, and players are going, okay, I took the one deal that was a bit of a bargain. Now I would like my money, please. And so their windows are all closing around the financials, whereas teams like, for example, Toronto, who'd never got the bargain in the first place, could end up coming out of it fairly okay because they've not got a massive bargain to make up with a lot of these players. So let's move into it because we're sort of there now.
Yeah.
Austin Matthews signs the 4-year extension in Toronto, 4 years at $13.25 million. 50 million of the 53s in signing bonuses. Notice how they didn't bother to put any stupid numbers at the end of this one.
Yeah.
It's almost like they copped an absolute pasting in the media for it and they went, not a hope.
No, we won't put a 34 at the end of it.
No, we won't do that. But this is, I think, where we sort of come to is that everyone got on Matthews and Mana and that for not taking a pay cut. And like Nylander sort of took a bit of a haircut and Nylander will be after his money. And they've been talking about that lately. But interestingly enough, there were a lot of people about this deal's been really fascinating online. Of course it is. It's Toronto.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people, see, the Leafs got smashed again on this deal. And I'm like, I think this is a really good deal. For me, this is a good deal. He's left some money on the table, believe it or not, folks. And also, what you're forgetting is that's not 13.25 under this cap. That's under next year's cap, which is supposed to go up by nearly 10, if not 10. So that deal only a little bit of an increase compared to where he was. It's 4 years. For the people going, well, why didn't he sign a long-term contract? He's got 5 more years to go in Toronto, guys. He's fine. He'll be 31 when the contract's up. Yeah. So are you really that upset that you didn't lock down 32 to 35? Is that what you're upset by? His 34 season is going to be amazing. 34 and 34. But like, I think it's perfectly fine. I think the more interesting part of this deal has nothing to do with Austin Matthews. I think it's what's coming in the next 3 years. Because Nathan McKinnon, for all of 6 months, held the record as the highest paid player in the league. Not Connor McDavid, for those people who've been complaining about it.
Yeah,
Nathan McKinnon.
He's literally just like 100K higher.
His contract has literally just kicked in. The 8 years have just kicked in. Just in time for Austin Matthews to sign a contract that is 650 over him. But the interesting bit for me is that Edmonton in 2 years' time and in 3 years' time, 2 years they've got Draisaitl, 3 years they've got McDavid. This starts the negotiation at 14.
At least, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
But what do you reckon about this? But what do you reckon about this deal? I think it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think it's more than reasonable considering his his market value and so forth. Like if he was a free agent, absolutely everyone would be scrambling to sign.
If he's a free agent, it's 14.
Yeah, at least, yeah, for sure. In terms of McDavid's, versus Matthews and all that kind of stuff, like it gets wobbly at this top end. Like when you start talking about like, oh well, he's not this guy or he's not this guy.
They do different things.
Yeah, they do different things. I mean, like Austin Matthews is. At least in terms of like goals per game, like the highest goal scorer in the last 5 years or whatever, however long he's been doing it for. Consistently, obviously he's had some injury issues and so forth. So the actual counting totals necessarily aren't as high as they could be if he played 82 every year. But he's perennially, if healthy, a 50-60 goal scorer. And, that's you kind of have to pay for that. I just find it interesting, just the various degrees of reaction to the deal, because I think that there's probably just that tiny little bit of leeway that Brad Treliving has in this new role where fans haven't turned on him yet in the way that they would have immediately turned on Dubas for signing this deal. I think that's a really kind of interesting factor in this, is that we'll see, I guess, long term how well that, kind of works for his legacy in terms of whether people start going like, oh, he he was handcuffed with all these things and he got stuck with it, or is it, what's the question going to be in a couple of years' time, whether Tavares and Marner and Nylander and everyone are still there, or that kind of thing. That,
but it's like it's like this is the not to go back on the whole Dubas Toronto media thing, but like the instant that they signed Carlson, you started getting articles from Chris Johnston and a bunch of the other Toronto guys. Dubas's new core four.
Yeah.
Fuck off.
Exactly.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Right?
They can't help themselves. They can't help themselves.
Stop. Like I don't like, and then you get all the Toronto guys. Oh well, Dubas is overpaying in Pittsburgh, and we've got Jim, and I'm like, we've got Brad's, right? It's like, have you seen what Brad's done so far? I mean,
yeah.
You want to talk about overpaying? Ryan Reed.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny he doesn't get the same immediate criticism in the same.
He's a hockey
guy.
guy.
That's the only thing for me.
He's a hockey guy.
Yeah.
His dad owns pizza shops. Anyway, it's just, look, I don't know. I think that there's going to be a favorable media response overall to this deal, and I think that there'll be a lot of Brad Treliving's Jim, his father.
Yeah.
Brad Treliving's a genius.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a genius. I also don't think that he's, horrible. I think this is a good deal. But you can't tell me that I don't think Dubas would have got something very similar done.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing.
I feel like this was the number.
I think this was the exact thing that he was always going to get, regardless of who was behind the desk.
Yeah,
and it's just a matter of reaction depending on who it is.
I think the more interesting negotiation is the Nylander one, and all the Swedes have been talking this week because they're all over in Sweden. So they're all talking, and what you get, obviously, and this is something we've mentioned this a few times, but it bears repeating. When players go back to their home countries for different things, pay attention to the media, because they say things in their native tongue that they don't say in American or in Canadian or in English in general, right?
Yeah.
They say things in their native tongue they would never say in a million years when they're talking to like English language reporters. But one thing they did say in English language, because Friedman and Sportsnet have been over there, is that Nylander's basically come out and gone, I've got no plans to go anywhere. I'm happy in Toronto. I don't really want to leave. I don't think the number will be a problem. I think we'll get this done, which is kind of what I think everyone has sort of felt, except for the media who are trying to drum up the idea that he's going to ask for 14.
Yeah.
Which he's never going to ask for 14. He wants a pay increase. And if I'm William Nylander, I point at the last couple of playoff series and go,
yeah, sure.
I've been the guy doing things for you. Like, it's me. You're paying these guys like all of this money, and then we get to the playoffs and I'm turning up. I don't know about them. Give me a little bit more, maybe a little bit. See, the problem for Toronto, as we said, is that they're still I think I worked it out again this morning. They're still 13 million over the cap. Obviously, you're going to get the Muzzin contract onto LTIR and the Murray contract. But that only gives them 10. They've still got to find 3 from somewhere. So I don't know what's coming yet, but Toronto's not done with the moves they've got to make because they've got to get some cap back somehow. So
it's interesting.
Don't know where they're coming from.
No, I think it's funny too, just how much as like NHL fans we're squabbling over like, $1 million or $1 million there or anything. And you look at it in comparison. I thought this was really interesting tweet from Ken Robinson that Austin Matthews' $13.5 million deal, while he's the highest paid NHLer, would be the 113th highest paid player in the NBA, the 103rd in the MLB, and the 88th in the NFL.
It's just ridiculous. It's absolutely stupid.
We're just not even playing the same, like.
No, it's a completely different sport.
Literally it's a completely different sport, but also like it's just.
Yeah, but literally it's a different financial sport.
Yeah, it's backyard sport compared to big league.
But Austin Matthews might have just got that deal. But you know who wouldn't have given him that deal? Harold Ballard wouldn't have given him that deal.
Absolutely not.
That's a segue, ladies and gentlemen, as we get on to the thing we're going to go into today. So I did give everyone some homework. I'm not sure how many people actually did it. I know a few people did because I saw some comments. There were some comments on the post where people had gone and watched it. For those who haven't watched what we're about to talk about, it's Offside, the Harold Ballard story. You can watch it on CBC Gem. using a VPN. It's perfectly legal to do that, by the way. That's not an illegal thing. They like that. And I know this because my other podcast is a Bake Off related one. And I do a lot with CBC over in Canada for Bake Off, and they actively encourage you to do that because it gives them ratings, because it counts. So they're perfectly comfortable with you using a VPN and going on to CBC Gem. It's a free account to create. And you can watch there's some really good hockey documentaries on there. There's a ton of really good hockey content on there. But one of the best things on there is this, which is the Harold Ballard story, as told by Jason Priestley. Mr. 90210 himself.
I think the thing for me from watching it a couple of weeks ago is that it doesn't even really matter to some extent how you present it, because Harold Ballard himself and the stories are just so fucking insane that you could have had anyone saying it and it would be entertaining, because you just, every time something happens, like, what?
I think my first point that I made to you after I watched it the first time was Alan Eagleson comes out of this looking like a mild-mannered voice of reason.
Yeah.
For those people who aren't aware, Alan Eagleson once, after one of the Canada Cups against Russia, ran onto the ice and stole the trophy and ran away with it. And they had another one minted and made and sent to the Russians because Alan Eagleson stole the trophy and wouldn't give it back. He's the mild-mannered voice of reason in this.
Yeah, Harold Ballard is basically a supervillain. Like it is. It's like Monty
in his own words.
Yeah,
like there's a bit when he's talking about the loss of King Clancy, and they say about, you had to be a special kind of person to put up with you, is what you're saying, Harold. And he goes, well, we all know what sort of a no good son of a bitch I am. And like, that's him on him.
Yeah, absolutely. And like he knows how he comes across and doesn't give a shit. Like, honestly.
So for those who aren't aware, Harold Ballard was from 1967. From 1967 is when he got control, really. No, 69, sorry, was when he got control. But from 69 to his death, was the owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs and the sole owner, after he managed an amazing board takeover. We'll go into that in a minute, because
basically he was like a minority owner during the years that they were winning. Like, they won like 3 cups or whatever. 4 cups or whatever, up to 67. He was
3 in a row plus 67.
And then basically, like, the whole thing just like Bradbury in front of him, if like it just opened up for him to take the entire board over.
My favorite part of, there's a couple of things I love in the early bit. So they talk about the club becoming the Maple Leafs, and then Conn Smythe buying the team, and we get the phrase that I never thought I would hear in my life. Conn Smythe is referred to as a gravel baron. What a phrase. Conn Smythe, gravel baron. I've got this idea of like twirling a moustache, I got the gravel. But so he didn't like Harold. He referred to him as a pirate. As they said, the Smythes were old money. And then the other big one on the board, because they were referred to as the Silver Seven, which were the 7 that ran the Maple Leafs in this period of time after they set the board up. And Bassett was the other one, who was the owner of most of the major newspapers in Toronto at the time. So they said the Smythes were old money. The Bassetts were sort of older money, but sort of newish money. And basically Ballard didn't enter into it. His father's fortune came from sewing machines. And then he also made a machine to cut hot dog rolls. That was his big patent. Which I just, the weirdness, and you watch this documentary, that's one of the least weird things that goes on, is that Harold Ballard made a machine to cut hot dog rolls.
Yeah.
That's normal. That's normal.
It's very forgotten in the whole process. He
basically got control by being best friends with Conn Smythe's son, Stafford.
Yeah.
And those two sort of maneuvered themselves into it was Bassett's, Stafford, Smythe, and Ballard running the club, but Conn still had shares. Then the Muhammad Ali got banned from fighting in America, and Harold Ballard's job was basically to run Maple Leaf Gardens. That was his job. And he made a hell of a lot of money. The way he made the money, things like, for example, the Beatles, when they came to Canada, he sold 2 shows. They were only booked for 1. He sold 2, then went to Brian Epstein and went, kind of sold a second show here. You good with that? And Epstein was like, yeah, whatever. He got the he took the Queen's photo out and replaced it with corporate boxes. And when someone said, but Con loves the Queen's photo, his response was, she doesn't pay admission. But when Ali versus George Chevello happened at Maple Leaf Gardens, Con Smythe, being a former war veteran and obviously very connected to the military, was so upset that draft dodger Ali was allowed to fight at Maple Leaf Gardens. He quit and then sold his shares to his son and Harold Ballard. So they got control. And then
borrowing a whole bunch of money to do it in the process.
Well, they went and borrowed money, but then at the same time, it gets really, it's one of the murkiest. How you can go from where Ballard and Smythe were to where they ended up in 18 months is batshit. So they basically got done for tax evasion, both of them. And they were taking money out of Maple Leaf Gardens to pay for their driveway renovations and all of this sort of stuff. And they were pulling money from the building. And Bassett then held a vote, and by a vote of 8-7 with him as the casting vote, expelled them from. Stafford Smythe was president and Ballard was executive vice president. Had them both kicked out, but allowed them to stay on the board. And that was a mistake, because in 18 months' time, using their shares, which were larger than everyone else's, they came back to the board and got themselves voted back on top, and Bassett had to resign. He sold his shares to the two of them, which gave them a massive majority of combined 71%. Then they're going to trial. So they're going to trial for tax evasion at this time. They've just taken over the board again.
The entire time they're still on trial.
They're on trial, and Stafford,
like multiple white collar crimes.
And Stafford Smythe going, "I'm not going to prison," and he was right, because 12 days before trial he dropped dead. And because he dropped dead, the shares were there. So Harold Ballard went down to TD Bank, took out $14 million, and bought his shares to give himself a 71% controlling stake, and basically made himself the president and the chairman, and then went to prison.
Yeah. Then was convicted. Although they, thankfully, he requested that they postpone the actual
going to prison for the Summit.
Yeah, they're going to prison until after the Summit series was finished, because he was
let him fly to Russia
at the time. And they allowed that. They let him fly to Russia, be there for the gold medal game, and then fly back and go to prison.
Also, Alan Eagleson and Ballard bought all the advertising rights for the Summit series.
Yeah,
so they made a fortune.
Yeah, it was incredible, conflict of interest that they were allowed to do this.
And then Ballard spent all of his time talking about how prison was like this luxurious hotel that he stayed in.
We've got these photos of him wearing a guard's uniform with his feet up with a steak and stuff in front of a color TV. Obviously, this is white collar, low security prison. So obviously, it wasn't ever going to be the prison from the movies. But basically, it just kind of seems like he had a holiday.
Lenny McDonald talks about it when he goes, "Well, when I signed for the club, I didn't meet him; he was locked up."
Yeah. Well, so I think he got sentenced for 3 years.
He got 3, but he only did
one. And then he was out and still the president of Maple Leaf.
His son Billy ran the club, and everyone went, he ran it really well, did a really good job. Yeah. And Harold came out and fired him.
Yeah, and went, all right, you're done here now. I'm going to come back.
So, one of the things that everyone sort of alludes to through this, one of the themes in this documentary, is really that Harold Ballard lacked any form of companionship. And a lot of this seems to stem from this longing for companionship. And his wife, Dorothy,
seemed to like his kids, to be honest.
We hated them with a fiery passion. His wife, Dorothy, dies in 1969 of cancer.
Yeah.
And they said he was never quite, I think the quote that I sort of really took from that one was they were talking about what happened when his wife died, and it was like, and Ralph Mellenby, who was the Hockey Night producer until '86, was like, he kind of decided after she died that he needed to go into executive mode, and for him, executive mode meant people needed to fear him.
Yeah,
and so
there. So he moved into the building, like he was living in Maple Leaf Gardens just so that he could just like wander around in the middle of the night and be there and be
like
there at all times.
So he set up a tiny apartment like over the front of Maple Leaf Gardens, and when you look at, like, they've got video of it, it's like literally it was like a broom closet.
Yeah,
and it was like not big at all. It's just this weird, like they said, he used to go down to like the cafe and get some food middle of the night. He'd go down and get some ice cream, go like he used to say to Daryl Sittler and stuff like that, I'd go and get the cereal in the morning and go sit in the bleachers and just eat cereal because it's my house. They refer to him as the night watchman. They're like, you didn't know where Harold was going to turn up. He's always in the building. They're like, he had 4 different exits and you didn't know which one he was going to use. Because he could just appear anywhere because he was permanently in the building. It was a really weird, like, the weirdest. So the thing about this is, and like my tag, for anyone watching the video, my tag is wishes King Clancy was his friend, because the friendship with King Clancy is really interesting. So he loses his wife, and they said basically King Clancy became his support. They said he never had a defined role within the organization. He was basically whatever Harold needed him to be. If they needed a standing coach, King would do that. If they needed someone to go out and sell tickets, King would do that. One of my favorite descriptions is one of the journalists who was like, King was the jester who distracted Harold so he didn't cut off more people's heads.
Pretty much.
But like, it just seems like it's really
kept him in a good mood, pretty much.
Because Harold Ballard is like universally loathed. And King Clancy was one of the most popular people in Toronto.
Well, I mean, to put it in context, like the Maple Leafs had come off a period of time of like unparalleled excellence. Like they were winning, cup after cup after cup. And basically Ballard takes over and then just within the course of like a decade just steers the plane right into the ground. Like they basically became bottom dwellers within a few years' time because of the decisions that he made. So he was not well liked in the city.
It was a really interesting. So the 70s are fascinating because the way he approached it was interesting. And I think the WHA was a really big problem for Toronto because the WHA came in. We talked about the WHA last off season. So go back and listen to that one because, I'm a massive WHA fan. But they were paying players a lot of money. And so Harold didn't believe in paying anybody. And that was the problem. And there's a really good conversation that happens in this where I can't remember which one of the journalists it is, but one of the journalists points out there was no salary cap, and the salary cap doesn't come in until obviously we get to like the 90s. There's no cap. They could have spent, they were by far and away, only the Rangers could keep up with them financially. They were by far and away making the most money. They by far and away, like the building was always full. Even when they sucked, the building was full. They were he did things like he shrunk the seats so he could put more seats in the building, right? Literally, he made the seats smaller to cram more in. Like, they made money hand over fist. His marketing, they made so much merchandise money. And he would not pay anybody. And the level to which this, like when people are trying to work out what is up with the Leafs, Harold Ballard is what is up with the Leafs. The legacy of Ballard. So 75, the Dave Keon thing. So Dave Keon obviously has finally now been made whole again with the organization. They retired his number. They put his banner up in the rafters. They brought him back because he was gone for forever. And he went because he went back to Ballard in 75 and went, I've been here forever. I'd like some more money, please. And he just refused, point blank. And they were offering him double the money to go to the WHA. So he took the double money and went. Ballard called him all sorts of names in the press. And like Dave Keon was Mr. Toronto. And like there was no suggestion that Keon would ever go anywhere else. They were talking about the organization, and they're like, there were people who used to go up to the general managers and go, your organization is smaller than most minor league teams. Like they had like a front office of 20 at the most, doing everything because Ballard didn't want to pay. And biggest example of his frugal nature was what happened with the programs. So, if you remember this one from the thing, why?
Oh yeah.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
go on.
He didn't want to. So he didn't want to put names on the back of jerseys because then they wouldn't sell programs. The people wouldn't work out who the players were. So, but the league forced him to put names on the back of jerseys. So he got letters that were the same color as the jersey and put them on the back of the jersey so that you couldn't read them. Though he was technically compliant. This is malicious compliance. Basically, he was compliant with what they asked him to do, but it was completely useless. So you still had to buy the program to see who 41 was and who.
His argument was if they're not paying $250 for a program, this doesn't work.
Yeah,
and it's like, come on, like seriously,
just nickel and diming all the way. I mean, look, my quote at the bottom of the link of the thing there is a snippet from the one vaguely appropriate Harold Ballard quote that I could find.
Really hard to find,
which is really hard to find. If you want to see what kind of person Harold Ballard was as a human being, search Harold Ballard quotes, and the first ones that you come up are some of the most
can't use them,
just like slap you in the face sexism and racism that you could possibly find, but.
And as they point out in the documentary, just quickly, not bad, like because it was of the time. It was bad at the time.
Yeah, it was shocking at the time. Like he was bad by like it's just bald faced. But this is what that quote is. Why should I put a bunch of Cadillacs on the ice when I can sell out with a bunch of Volkswagens? So basically, you know, from his perspective, regardless of whether they were winning, regardless of whether the team was any good, he was making money hand over fist, and that was really all that he cared about.
Now, the question they ask in the documentary is, would the Leafs have won in the 70s if he'd kept hold of the talent they had? And the answer that everyone comes to is yes. And the reasoning behind this, the team they bring up in particular is the 77-78 Leafs. So the 77-78 Leafs, you've got Mike Palmateer in net, you've got Boria Salming, you've got Lanny McDonald, you've got Daryl Sittler, Tiger Williams, Roger Nelson's the coach. They win their first playoff round. They go down in 4 because they were beaten up to the Habs, and they were just banged up, and Salming was out injured, and they went down in 4, but 4 close games to the Habs. And everyone's like, great. And like even Don Cherry, and we're going to talk about Don Cherry in a minute, but Don Cherry even goes, they were a player away. Yeah. They were one player away from winning. Ballard looks at this team and goes, great, but I'm not paying any of you. No one is getting paid here. And within 12 months, he starts to break the team up and starts to move people, which leads to the most infamous coaching decision in the history of the league. He fires Roger Nelson at the start of the week. Daryl Sittler is taking training with Lanny. They're running training. They go back to the general manager, who didn't want to fire him in the first place, which was Jim Gregory. Goes back to Jim Gregory and go, can we have Roger back, please? We need Roger. Then he goes, I wasn't really firing him. I just wanted to give him a bit of a scare. It's all good. So he brings Roger back. They're in the dressing room before they're about to go out. He walks into the dressing room with a paper bag, looks at Roger Nelson and goes, put this on. No one knows you're the coach. Put this on. Go out, do the anthem. And at the end of the anthem, pull the bag off your head and reveal it's you. And Roger Nelson's standing there going, what? And they said the players are looking at him going, what is... No. And like, no, put the bag on your head. And there's this argument going on about, is he going to wear a bag on his head? And the assistant general manager's like, the first idea was to send me out onto the bench. And he went, no, I'm not doing that.
Like, and at this point in time, like they haven't made any announcements or anything. Like the people have no idea who the coach is for the Leafs. They're waiting to see who if someone comes out or who goes out or whatever. So basically, it's this. You know, this will be hilarious. Put this paper bag on your head or whatever. Like to ask someone in a job to like wear this paper bag on your face.
And then Nielsen walks out, and the crowd goes absolutely mental when they work out that Roger Nelson's behind the bench. Yeah. The other, it's really interesting because by the end of that year, they sacked him again. And this time he was gone. But they also sacked Jim Gregory as general manager. And it's of all of the mistakes, and he's made a lot of mistakes. And I think it's Rick Vive who says, just when things get good, Harold would step in and do something stupid and turn it all upside down, which is one of the best quotes from a player in there. But they sacked Jim Gregory, and for all of the mistakes they made, everybody to a person went, the biggest mistake that he made was sacking Jim Gregory as the general manager, because Jim Gregory wasn't allowed to do anything to make the team better. He sacked Gregory because the team didn't get better. But in the meantime, they didn't get better, not because Gregory wasn't making moves. Gregory was doing everything he could. But Harold would step in and do something. And then he'd do a press interview and go, I've never interfered with the team. So all the time is the answer to that. And like, it's really interesting because, again, Don Cherry does the whole, they're a player away. But then they cut back to it. And they're really clever. So they're really clever with Don Cherry because he makes a lot of statements about how stupid Harold Ballard was, how bad for the sport Harold Ballard was. He wouldn't pay the players. It's his own fault for losing the team. Then they cut to a quote of him going, I like what he says and I like what he does. This is Don Cherry at the time. They talk about this here where he goes, you know, Roger Nielsen was a great coach and they were there and they were one player away. Cut to Don Cherry at the time, where he basically says, I don't like the way that he plays and I don't like the way that he coaches and I feel like you need to be more entertaining. So maybe they do need to fire him. So, like, Don Cherry's full of shit. One of the takeaways from this documentary is Don Cherry's absolutely full of shit.
Look, I'm sure that Don Cherry probably liked Harold Ballard as a person the entire time because they're the same kind of person.
That's what he says. I like what he says.
Yeah, I'm sure he does because, you know, he says some of the shit that Don Cherry likes to say or wishes he could say. But whether or not...
Hindsight Cherry likes pointing out that he was right all along. The other funny... So, in line with Hindsight Cherry, the replacement for Jim Gregory is possibly the most baffling hockey decision ever made. Punch Imlach. The man who coached them to their last Stanley Cups in the 60s is brought back in 1979 to general manage the Toronto Maple Leafs. And the first thing he does is call Daryl Sittler into the office and go, just who exactly do you think you are? My captains are management and they will do what management says. Then calls Alan Eagleson, who was his manager, and says, I don't believe in no trade contracts. I'll test you in court on that one. Then, this is where Tiger Williams calls Punch Imlach a bad person. And then you get the situation where they're trying to trade Daryl Sittler because they don't believe in no moves.
Well, basically, they're just like, well, we're just going to keep doing it until you give up and decide to stay.
And Daryl Sittler and Alan Eagleson are like, we got a contract, dude. You can't do that.
Yeah, and it's basically I'm going to create a workplace culture that's so toxic that you agree to waive your no trade clauses. Basically,
so how desperate were they to do this, and how? So why is Toronto the way it is? This is an example of why Toronto is the way it is. They try to move him to Philly. Alan Eagleson goes, "We've got a contract. Can't do that." 2 days later, they move Lanny McDonald to Colorado. Because he was Daryl Sittler's best friend. So they move Lanny McDonald out of spite to piss him off to move him. Like, what are we going to do to get rid of Daryl Sittler? Because Punch Imlach doesn't like him. I know. Make the team worse.
Let's make the team worse and get rid of all his friends until he wants to leave.
What planet does a team run where you decide that the way to get rid of the guy you just don't like because you just don't click is to get rid of one of your best players?
Maybe this is a bold thing to say, but I feel like making trades out of spite is never really a good
business decision. Does it? So it doesn't seem to work, does it? That's where Rick Vives comment. He goes, all he needed to do was hire competent people to run the team. And he couldn't do that. Like, and this is the thing, the vibe that comes out of this is that there were moments where the Leafs nearly succeeded in spite of Harold Ballard.
Yeah.
And Ballard looked at it and went, no, we can't let that.
We're going to fuck that up. We're going to make sure that we get rid of that guy or don't pay that guy.
Yeah, and like when Sittler was eventually moved, it was because he was being paid $100K under most players around his level. And he went and asked for a new contract. And originally he said, yep, we can definitely do that. I want to keep you around. And a day later, he rang him up and went, I will move you to any city in the league you'd like to go to. Like, and that, as I said, we then get into, so it was really weird in terms of Rick Vive scores 53 seasons in a row. The newspaper puts a heading up there that goes, now Harold's going to have to loosen the purse strings. And Harold looks at Rick Vive and goes, if you think I'm paying you another fucking dime, you're out of your mind. So Rick Vive goes, you get all the sexism. The only person in the documentary who liked him is Wendell Clark.
Yeah. All this time, by the way, like not just competing against other teams, but competing against another league. Like it's insane. It's insane the that hand over fist money that he's making, and just the complete disregard for like paying anyone what they're worth.
Yeah, and then like there was a great quote in there where one of the media outlets went to him and went, people think you're the problem, Harold. And his response was, well, maybe I am, but if they want to buy the place, I'm open for sale. All they have to do is bring money. So his problem was, what didn't even go, I'm not the problem. He went, yeah, I probably am, but guess what? I own it.
Yeah, so I'm going to do whatever I want with my toy.
Cough up the money. You cough up the money, I'll go away. But until you cough up the money, I'm not leaving. And like, he didn't care.
No.
Like, he could not have cared less. The journalist stuff, which again, I'll let everyone online look up a bunch of that stuff. A lot of good stuff in the documentary on that, mainly because we can't say most of it on a podcast because we'd immediately be flagged. My favorite response to that, though, was when he tried to ban females from the locker room and made a bunch of very inappropriate comments about females being in a locker room in the first place. The media union in Toronto reacted by sending every single one of their journalists to the next Leaf game and rushing the locker room. So they put 35 journalists in the tiny Leafs locker room, which then got everyone banned. The next night, they said they all pushed in there, and Harold was in there, saw them all coming, and had his cane in his hand, and just started waving a journalist with his cane to try to hit them or to get them out of the locker room. There was a point that Jonathan Bennett made that I thought was interesting, because he said he thought that Ballard was a bit smarter than people gave him credit for. Because, first of all, he knew he wasn't going anywhere. So he's like, eventually you're all going to come around to what I want you to do anyway, because I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
The other point that I sort of came up with was he made himself the target.
Yeah.
So his way to keep the brand of the Maple Leafs strong while they were absolutely crap and he's not spending any money was he just made himself the target. So everyone was like, we love the team, we hate Harold. And so the team can be playing like utter garbage.
Yeah, and people are still going.
Harold took the bullet.
Yeah, it's a real kind of like interesting character in a lot of ways. Like, I think he's fully aware of how offensive he is as a person, how how people feel about him, how people like, and obviously doesn't care. But at the same time, just literally is just a garbage human being with a bunch of like awful opinions. But at the same time, was also like donating
the largest single contributor to the Special Olympics.
Yeah, huge sums of money, like $50,000 at a time. Yeah, basically single-handedly keeps the Special Olympics running, but also made it a requirement for them to take these donations to not tell anyone that it was him that was donating this money. Like, could have easily been a lauded public figure, the biggest philanthropist in the city.
And they said that Christmas time had happened, and he'd send someone down to the vault. And they'd come up with a bunch of money, and then he'd go around the building paying out these random cash bonuses to workers.
Yeah.
And they're like, tell people, Harold. And he's like, no, they'll think I've gone soft. And I think, again, a lot of that goes back to, I think all of this goes back to, not to psychoanalyze the man, but it goes back to the death of his wife. And he sort of, I think, decided after the death of his wife that he was just going to be this hardened ass. And that was what he was going to do. Which explains why King Clancy liked him, because Clancy probably saw the other bit.
I'm sure that there was a lot of aspects of like, this is what it is to be a man. I've got to portray this stereotype,
hardened exterior,
toxic masculinity of like, I can't show anyone that I care about people or do anything like this or whatever. I've got to have this hard line on everything, and just basically ruin himself through the process.
And then when King Clancy died, we then got Yolanda McMillan. That was weird. So as somebody puts it in the documentary, she showed up at Maple Leaf Gardens one day and never left.
Basically just kept calling herself Mrs. Ballard. And
they were never married. Called herself Mrs. Ballard. Mary Ormsby, the journalist, has my favorite quote in the whole thing is they were perfectly matched. They were two peas in a pod because she was a con and so was he.
Yeah.
And like they said, the interesting part is Harold knew They were like, yeah, he'd started to lose his faculties and stuff like that by like 86, like when all this stuff happens. He'd started to lose his faculties. But he was very aware of what was going on here. And he was very aware that Yolanda was after him for his money. And he didn't care. He was just like, I'm having fun. I don't really give a crap. Though my family and Yolanda will fight over the money when I'm dead. Guess what? I don't care. They can fight over the money once I die. But in the meantime, I'm not particularly worried about what's going to happen to the inheritance because I'm not here for it. I'm doing whatever I want to do. They said that he was very aware that Yolanda was just trying to take him for everything he was worth. And he couldn't have given a crap.
Well, it's funny too because in the end he ended up just donating like pretty much all of his fortune to charity when he died.
She got 50,
yeah, none of his kids got anything. It's real funny the interview with one of his kids at the end being like, we don't, we didn't get anything out of it, but that's all right. We were already rich, so they didn't. Really
We're already
care.
rich. We're already rich. We can't spend the money we've got. I was rich independently long before this.
Yeah.
But like Yolanda, the belief is the majority of the money went to charity. Yolanda, the belief was in the will she got given $50,000 a year for life or until she remarried. But they did say that Steve Stavro, who was the majority owner after he died, basically gave her a $5 million golden handshake and a pair of gold seats and said, "Don't talk."
Yeah.
And they said Yolanda disappeared. Went, "That's okay, cool. I've got that. That's done." Gord Stellick said that she was more obvious than a $3 bill, and he wasn't fooled by it. The two last things before we finish up, the two last things that I want to mention about this bit is, first of all, TC Puck, the dog. The dog had to be in the team photo one year and needed to be sitting at the front of the team photo. The team photo went for a really long time because the dog couldn't sit down on the ice because every time the dog sat on the ice, his balls got cold. So Yolanda had to go and find a towel to put on the ice in front of TC Puck so the dog could be in the photo. And the players were all stuck up on the scaffold while they found a towel for the dog to sit on. And the last one was Gord Stellick when he was the general manager. And he walks into his office one day and he goes, "There's Yolanda in like her underwear, just sort of in my office and like putting clothing on a desk." And I thought to myself, this isn't going to be the general manager's office much longer. And he goes, "It wasn't. It became a walk-in closet for Yolanda and I lost my office. And I had to move somewhere else because Yolanda wanted a closet." It was just, look, we haven't done it justice.
No.
You need to go and watch this. If you haven't watched it already, you don't have to be a Leafs fan. In fact, I think it's probably funnier for some people if you're not a Leafs fan. But it explains Toronto. I think it does a really good job of explaining Toronto. And I think it does a really good job of explaining the Toronto media and their relationship to the team. Because I think there's a lot of Ballard and a lot of the Ballard years ingrained in that city. Like what he was that team from like 67, 68, 69, all the way up until he died. He was the team.
Mm.
So you didn't really talk about the Leafs. You talked about Harold Ballard.
Mm.
And again, as we've said, the number of stories that you look at and you go, that can't be true. And it is, and it's not even close to the worst.
It's insane. The amount everyone's got a different favorite story about some of the shit that he did. It's just on a daily basis. Just incredibly insane, and at times awful person that also did a bunch of
gave to charity,
incredible things. Like, yeah, it's just a weird character of a person, really.
Yeah, I think, as I said, I think the death of his wife probably is the pivotal moment. And again, anytime when Alan Eagleson comes out of a documentary looking sane, it's weird. Anyway, that's going to do us for this week. So please go check that out. I recommend that. I cannot recommend that highly enough. We will be back probably in the next couple of weeks. Well, definitely in the next couple of weeks because we're getting close to preseason. We've got our preseason predictions to do. We've got probably our Ask the GM. Who knows? That might come back. I'm looking forward to that one. That's always fun, putting on voices. They did a new voice this year. Interesting. Anyway, we've enjoyed this, and we'll catch you all later.
Yeah.